Yeah. Let's send you an emoji.
Yeah.
Hopefully all is good. Hey, here we go.
It's
That
from
was
me.
you.
It's from me. Yes. Guys, let's check our connection because I want to see that you are here. Chat doesn't work. Okay, Maria, can you check our chat? Anatoly wrote that chat doesn't work. Chat disabled. But in any case, can you hear me?
We're probably okay with the sound. Yeah, we got confirmation from Julia in the
Yeah.
Q&A.
Okay, so I think Maria will check what's happening with the chat, but in any case, Julia can hear us. Guys, who else can hear us and see? Yes, I hear. Okay, thank you. And see, great. Okay, guys, so then I see that 2 minutes has passed and maybe we can start. Yeah, Filip, are you ready?
Yes,
Great.
I'm ready.
Great. So guys, welcome to the Symphony Solutions Tech Talk. My name is Vitaly Timashkov. I'm a solutions architect and head of QA practice at Symphony Solutions, and I am an active member of our internal QA community. We call it QA band. It's like a music band because we write code like a music, but not only code, we also test as well as music. Symphony Solutions is a Dutch-based, agile-driven company delivering full cycle of digital development services in many different domains, like iGaming, healthcare, e-commerce, and many others. And we are a remote-first company, and our talents can work from any place all around the globe. By the way, test. Yes, Martin? Okay, I will clean up Q&A session, but I will continue. So in Symfony, we have a lot of openings, which you can find in our website. And you can find the link in our description to this event. And these vacancies are not only for QA automation and QA, but for many other different specializations. I see that Q&A is clearing. Today, we are pleased to welcome you, our guest, Filip Hric, who is a well-known expert in test automation. He is a Cypress ambassador. He is independent educator and consultant who teach testers about web development and developers about testing. Hi, Filip.
Hey, hello, nice to meet everyone.
Yeah. And today, Filip will talk about a very hot and summer topic, how to avoid 8 most common mistakes in Cypress Test Automation. We have streaming into YouTube, so you can watch us here in Zoom or there. And please, you're welcome to ask your questions, so write it in Q&A section, and we will try answer as many as possible at the end of our event. And this session will be recorded, so you can review it later, and total duration is about 1 hour. So, Filip, now let's go with the main part. The stage is yours.
Thank you very much. I started sharing my screen. Hopefully there are no problems there, but I'm assuming Zoom is quite reliable, so we can hopefully do this smoothly. So thank you very much for the very warm welcome. I'm really happy to be here. Thanks for inviting me on this event, and thanks for having the chance to be a part of it. So my name is Filip. It's nice to meet you. As it has been said, I'm an independent educator at the moment. Everything I do usually you can find on my homepage, philiphric.com. Plus, on the lower right corner in the presentation, you can see my @handle. So you can follow me on Twitter if you're interested in getting connected. But you can also find me under my name on LinkedIn, and I'll be happy to connect over there. What you can find on my homepage is usually workshops, presentations, webinars like these, courses, consultations, and this everything I do as a Cypress ambassador, which I guess I have to say now, it's a non-paid thing. I'm not getting paid by Cypress, but I'm just a Cypress enthusiast. And as I entered the tech world 7 years ago, I stumbled upon this technology and I started becoming a really big fan of this. So today I want to talk to you about how to avoid common mistakes when writing Cypress tests. So those of you who have been using Cypress, you might remember being promised non-flaky tests, right? Finally, a solution where our test will never be flaky. And you will test your code and not your patience. So you go ahead, you try this new fresh tool, and story have maybe gone like this, right? You're typing furiously, and as you start writing your tests, you soon realize that your expectations have not exactly been met, right? Your test gets flaky, your pipeline fails, and suddenly it's a nightmare. So what do? Obviously you need help, right? So you'll reach out to the community and ask for help. I actually run a Discord server where people can join, and it's called Learning Cypress. So if you need help, there is a I need help channel, which is probably the most active on the whole Discord channel. And there are a couple of common problems that pop up repeatedly. And these are some of the common mistakes that either harm stability or the effectivity of the tests. So these mistakes sometimes stem from either taking habits from other tools and trying to apply them to Cypress, and sometimes they just stem from like not really understanding how the tool works internally, which is important if you want to write stable tests, because it doesn't happen magically. We have been hearing about Playwright as a solution more and more often, but the same instabilities that you get in Cypress, you will get from Playwright as well, because how you use your tools actually matters. The test design will matter no matter which tool you are going to be using. So let's take a look at some of the common mistakes that pop up on my Discord server and that I have been seeing as like the most common. So the first one, the most obvious one, is explicit waiting. And I know this one is kind of obvious because no one likes explicit waiting, right? You just your test is doing nothing for X amount of seconds. So here's an example of how that might look, right? We want to render an element, so we visit our page, and then this element loads super slowly, so we wait for 10 seconds. And then that element finally appears, and we have a passing test, right? So the problem with this, that while this is happening, our test is doing nothing. It's just waiting, sitting there, hoping that the page eventually loads. But what ends up happening is that your test is burning money on pipeline, and then maybe the 10-second limit is not enough, so your limit will get increased, and seconds become minutes, minutes become hours, and as they add up, you are just wasting your money, you're wasting your time. And there is a better way of how you can approach this, and that is to use timeouts. So here is an example of how a timeout can be used. Timeouts is a core concept in Cypress, and you can actually specify timeouts not only in commands, but for all tests. Or maybe you were aware of the whole default timeout in the Cypress configuration, but this could be new. So what this does is that it actually sets a upper limit for how long we want to wait for that button to actually be visible, right? So Cypress will query these for 10 seconds, and only after 10 seconds, if it doesn't appear, it will make the test fail. But it will not wait for 10 seconds. If the button appears in 2 seconds or in 1 second, then we will move on immediately. So we don't actually spend, so this test is actually faster. We don't spend time waiting in the test. And of course, as I mentioned, you can set up your different timeouts for different things in Cypress. So there's a default command timeout, which usually means that if you want to get an element or something, and that's set for 4 seconds. But we have execution, task timeout, we have request and response or page load. These are basically the defaults, which you can set to anything you want. So that's mistake number 1. Oh, actually, I forgot to mention one thing. You actually can set it up globally, but what you can do is that you can set up these different options per test, right? So if we have a test that is particularly slow, then we can maybe just change the timeout just for this one test, because we're testing a part of the application that is particularly slow. So that can be quite useful to play with the timeouts instead of waiting. So let's now move on to the common mistake number 1, and that is unreadable selectors. Now, sometimes if you're searching for a selector, you might get into a situation where it's just like really hard to reach, and you end up creating something like this. You have a div that has an nth child, and then the closest child is again div. There's this flex, then this div. What this is, I couldn't tell you, right? Just from reading that. It's quite unreadable. So my advice would be to write your selectors in a readable way. It makes a whole lot of difference if you are debugging your tests, right? Because eventually we are writing code not only for the computer to execute it, but also for us to be able to debug it and to take a look into it and to actually know what we are testing, right? So Cypress has a whole set of recommendations on how you should approach selectors. This is actually a screenshot taken from the documentation, and they would say that using a generic button, click, whatever, is not very good because it's just too general. If we rely on classes, that's also not a very best approach because it is coupled to styling, right? So if we have our whole page is red and it uses red buttons and red elements, and then one day we decided to rebrand and everything becomes green, then all of those red classes will become green classes, and it's probably going to mess up your functional test, although it should not mess up the functionality because functionality stays the same. Then we have IDs and attributes and stuff like that, and that can be used. That's a little bit better. But what Cypress enables you to, recommends you to do is to use dedicated selectors. And having written thousands of tests already, I would say this is a really good approach. So I try to rely on classes, and just from my experience, having a dedicated selector for your end-to-end test makes all the difference. It's just easier to maintain. It works really well. So I would stick to this recommendation. But sometimes we're in a situation where you are not able to add your attributes because you don't really have access to the source code, which again, I would say is not the best situation to be in, but sometimes we don't get to choose these, right? Well, what sometimes happens and what we might be able to reach out for are XPaths. So XPaths are supported in Cypress. You need to install a plugin, but it's an official plugin from Cypress, and you can use that. But honestly, I don't think you need that. So here's a comparison of using pretty much the same selecting the same element, but with on the left we have an XPath, and on the right we have the Cypress way. So Cypress has all of these different commands that can help you to find a selector. So in here, we are trying to, in the first example, we're trying to select an element by index. Then we want to select an element containing a specific child element. The third example shows a text. We want to select element by text, right? And then we also have an element that's right after a specific element. And as you can see, these XPaths can get quite complex and really, really hard to read. In Cypress, what you can do is take a two-step approach. So you first get the element that you are sort of jumping off from, and then you specify your selection. So if we have multiple of these board elements, then we can select the first one by index. So we start the index by 0, and that's it. If we want to select an element containing a specific child element, we can take a look at the parent. So we can traverse and go up. We can select an element by text very easily by using contains command. And if we want to be very specific and want to select like the next element, then we can do that as well by using next command. So we can traverse up and down and left and right with Cypress commands, and they are all there built in. So you don't even have to install a plugin. Not that it's a bad thing. I think plugins are awesome and you should use them. But yeah, make sure that your selectors are readable. It's going to make a whole lot of difference. All right, moving on to the mistake number 3, selecting elements improperly. So finding selectors is just a half of the story. In this example, we are making a simple assertion. We got 2 elements. And if you take a look at the code, it might be pretty easy to read, right? We're selecting a card. That's going to find 2 elements, right? So we are filtering out with the EQ command, which is going to take the first element from those 2. And then we say that it should contain text, box. So we have an assertion. And just looking at this test and looking at this application where we have 2 elements and both of them actually have the text box, can you tell which element this test is going to select? The answer might be quite easy, right? It looks like we should be selecting the first element because that's the one we are filtering out over here with the EQ1. But the answer is actually a little bit more complicated because we will be selecting whichever element renders first. So this is the demonstration. So if we have 2 cards and we have this loading while card in each of the lists will render, then we're going to select the first one. But if the situation is different and the first list is loading, then we're going to select the select one, which can lead us to some unexpected results. So whichever list will load first, that will be the one that's going to be tested. And in here we have a good assertion that's going to pass anyway, but we're not deterministic in terms of like what we are testing. The thing is that the way how Cypress works is that whenever a Cypress command fulfills its action, it will move on right to the next one. Cypress is optimized for speed. So as soon as one command is finished doing a thing, then it's going to move on to the next command. And that is a good thing to have in mind when you're writing your tests, because when you're interacting with the application, you can actually get to a situation where that will give you unexpected results because the test is just moving too fast. So in this test, there are actually multiple ways of how we can fix that. This is just one of the ways how that can be mitigated. So instead of filtering out the element that we want to have, we can just use a contains command, select the card that actually contains the text we want. And that way, even though the second card would load first, Cypress would retry and eventually it would find the element that has this text. So just a tip for you over there for selecting elements properly. All right, moving on to mistake number 4, ignoring requests in your app. So modern applications that we are testing nowadays usually communicate with server either with GraphQL or REST API. And what that usually means is that we get some data from the server, and that data will then get rendered or re-render our application. So if we don't take this into account, we might get into some trouble, right? So just look at the example over here. So in here, we want to make sure that the board has no lists. So we visit the board detail page, we take a look at the list, and we say that it should not exist. And our test is actually passing. So this is a screenshot from this test being ran. But if you take a look, we actually see the list. So this is that's the gray card that we see over here. This, we are asserting that this does not exist. So we are getting a false positive, which is a nightmare if you are a tester. That's not what you want. First of all, the tricky thing is that we're doing negative testing, and my personal advice would be try to avoid negative testing. But if you have to do that, there are ways of how you can do that, and using requests and actually seeing the communication that your application does can make that difference. So when we look at the test and we look at the timeline, which we have in Cypress, that enables us to look in the application at each state, we will see that our get command is actually being executed before our API calls are being made. So what this means is while we were using the get command, the data was still loading, and we have asserted that it should not exist. So the test actually passed, which is not a good situation to be in. And also it's sort of, I'm repeating the same point as in the previous chapter, and that is, as soon as a command in Cypress finishes doing its thing, it will move on to the next command. So Cypress being optimized for speed can sometimes lead to some unexpected results. All right, so what we need to do is to take a look at this API lists endpoint, which will actually load all of the lists that are in our database, and will essentially make this loading animation move away and render our list. The way we can do that, I had a point which I forgot to tell. Yeah, we are getting a false positive. So if you are doing a negative testing, try to make sure that the test is written correctly. In other words, never trust a test that you haven't seen fail. If it's testing the thing, if it's showing the correct thing, you should also make sure that it will catch the bad thing. So what we can do in the situation as we had right here is to use the intercept command. So this intercept command is a pretty cool one. What it will do, it will take a look into all the network communication, and it will look into a GET request that has the word lists in the URL. Basically, we are telling Cypress, hey, watch out for this request. I'm interested in that one, and I want to see when it happens. So what I'm doing over here is that I'm visiting the board detail, and after I open the board, I wait for that request, for that intercepted request to happen. As Cypress is always going to move on to the next command only if the previous command has finished, what this will cause is that after we visit and wait for the request, we will move on to the get command only after we get the response from the server on this API call. So this will make sure that our test will properly fail when we are in a situation when we are testing that the list should not exist. So this will finally fail. We get no false positives, and we can actually be sure that we are testing what we are intending to be testing. All right, moving on to another mistake, and that is overlooking DOM re-rendering. So in this situation, I have a test where I'm testing this search bar. So what I'm doing here, let me show you quickly. I'm visiting an application. I'm triggering the search bar by clicking Command K, and then I take a look into the search input, and I type the letters 4. So as you can see, we have triage found bugs and search for critical bugs. So eventually we're going to end up with a single item as we finish typing. What we want to do is we want to get a result item, filter out the first one, and make sure that the text it contains is going to have the text search for critical bugs. So as we type this, we are searching for this last element. And as we finish typing this, we should only have one element in the list. Now, the way our application works is that as we type each key into our search bar, we're going to get 3 API calls. So we are going to search for letter F, then we are going to search for letters FO, and then finally we're going to search for letter FOR. So what's going to happen what's going to happen is that the first request is going to make our application render like this. The second is going to make our application render like this. And the third one is going to make our application render like this. So we end up with a single element. What that is going to mean, again, I'm mentioning this for the third time today, is that as soon as the as the command is finishing doing its thing, it will move on directly to the next command. So what might end up happening is that when we don't wait for these API calls to finish, is that we're going to select a result item, but we're not going to select the first one, because we are going to be selecting the one, we're going to be selecting it at the time while we still had 2 results. One solution is to wait for the third one to finish, but also this is the mistake that this approach might struggling to find the words, but this is kind of the mistake that can happen to you when you approach stuff like this. So you might have seen this in the past, that the element has been detached from DOM. Now the good news is that with Cypress version 12, this problem is much harder to get to, because it's actually Cypress actually is going to retry the querying of the elements. So you should be seeing this much less, but this was a model situation of when something like that should happen. So here, if you're not looking on how the DOM re-renders, how the things are happening, you might get into a situation where you're not getting the right result. The way to fix that, especially in versions before 12, is to add a guarding assertion. So if we take into account that Cypress is moving on to the next command as soon as possible, we can add a command that's going to maybe slow down the test a little bit, so we move on to the next one at the point we want. So in this case, we are asserting first that we just get the one result, right? That's what we see, that's what we want to have rendered. And only after that, we're going to make sure that the result actually contains the text that we want. So this would be another tip of how you can mitigate that. All right. Next common mistake is inefficient command chains. So Cypress has this chaining command syntax, which works really nice. It's sort of like a scenario. I really like this syntax because it sort of forces you to go linear, to go from A to B until the Z, right? What this means is that you create these chains of commands that are going to sort of create the scenario for your test. Now, a chain like this is not really the best practice. This is hard to read, and it also ignores how Cypress commands work. So there are actually a couple of types of commands in Cypress. There are parent and child commands, and I have highlighted them over here. So get, and location are example of parent commands, and this click, type, and shoot are example of child commands. Child commands usually need to be chained off a previous command. Parent commands don't have to be. Now, this code will still work, but it's going to get confusing when you read it, because you might feel like this new board input is actually being somewhere inside this create board, which might not always be the case. So while this looks like a huge chain of commands, it's actually multiple chains here. So each parent command starts a new chain. And this can be really nicely shown if we take a look into the console, where Cypress prints out information. If you're writing your tests and you're not using the console, you're doing something wrong. And I'm here to tell you, you should be using your console, because there's so many vital information in there that you should have it open at all time. So if we take a look at the code from the test that I have just shown you, you might see that the get command is going to select this board. And that's going to be shown in this yielded parameter, right? Here we go. We have the get command, and here we have the yielded data from console. If we take a look at the click command, we can see that it has been applied to the create board element that we have selected in the previous element. If we move on to the next command, you will see that this is yielding something else. So we are actually changing context in here. And each command yields something. So in other words, each command is passing some information onto the other command. And you can see this in the documentation under the yields part, which can be shown under every command. But also looking into the console will bring you some very good understanding of what's happening in there. So I very much encourage you to take a look into that. It will increase your understanding of command chains, and as a result, you will start creating these chains that make way more sense. And as a bonus, it's much easier to read. So this example on the right is pretty much the same commands that we have on the left, but it now splits this test into logical chunks, where we get an element, click on it, then we get an input, type into it, and then we are asserting some path name. Whereas in here, it's kind of hard to tell what we are trying to do. Or at least we are increasing a cognitive load to sort of decipher what's going on here. All right, mistake number 7. That's overusing UI. Now, this might be a little bit surprising, because when we are talking about UI tests here. So why should we be skipping UI? So this is an example that I want to give you. We want to check all the links inside a navigation bar. So we have a navigation bar. It has a blog page, about page, and a contact page. So the way we decide to do it traditionally is to take that blog element, click on it, and then check whether it has redirected us to the correct path. And then we go back to the initial page, do the same for the about page, and do the same for the contact page. We go back and forth, left and right. But there is a problem with this. We're not actually checking if this is live, because if the blog about our contact page would give us 404, Cypress would not tell us, right? And we might not even see if the content of the page is actually rendered correctly. So even though it will show you 200, it will tell us nothing about whether the page is live. So another approach might be to, okay, click on the link, but actually check if there's a content on the page. But this is going to make our test slow. And maybe the content will be rendered if we are redirected to like a generic 404 page. But even if we check the element, we might not be so sure. So if the goal is to make sure that all the links in navigation bar are live, we can choose a different approach. We can choose to just trigger a request, which would be pretty much the same thing as we would do if we were to visit one page after another. So in here, I'm taking all of the links from the navigation bar, and then I'm iterating over them to trigger a request. So this is going to trigger a GET request to all the href elements. And that way we are checking whether the page under that link is actually giving us an error 200 or a status code of 200 or an error of 404. Mistake number 4, which I'm now getting into, is repeating the same set of actions. Now, we all know the dry principle. Don't repeat yourself. And yet, when it comes to testing, we often walk the same path to get where we want, right? So for example, when we want to log in into a page, we always type in the credentials, we type in the email, we type in the password, log in, and then continue with our test. And since Cypress deletes all the cookies and session storage in between tests, we might get into a situation where we want to, when we are doing the login over and over again. Usually tests contain of 3 parts. This is some of the most common design patterns when it comes to testing in general, but especially for end-to-end testing, where we do arrange, then act, and then we make an assertion. Now, especially this arrange part is something that we tend to use UI for. And this is what I'm advocating against. Cypress is bundled with these powerful tools that can help you out to prepare your test in an effective way. And so, for example, if you want to log in into a test, this would be our arrange part. And in this example, what we are doing is we are creating a custom command. So we're trying to log in into our page. So what we do is that we visit the login and then type in our email. Then we type in the password, and then we submit the login, click on the submit button, and we should be logged in. So what I'm doing over here is asserting that the logged user element appears, like your name in the top right corner or something. So in here, in this test that we have here, we are using this custom command, this CY login that we have created before every test. So we are actually doing a good job of not repeating ourselves. But what happens in here is that when we have 4 tests like we have over here, test number 1, number 2, number 3, and number 4, is that we are repeating these same set of steps every time and before every test. So we're spending a lot of time in UI and repeating ourselves in the execution of the test, which ends up being quite slow. Now, Cypress has come with a really good solution, because one way of trying to make this login thing faster is to do the login programmatically. You probably might have already heard about that. Don't use UI, just login programmatically, which is easier said than done. Because if you want to figure out your login, especially if you're using third-party login or you're using OAuth authentication, that's going to be very, very complicated. Now, with this session command, you actually have things can get quite easy. So what this will do is, in here, I'm still using the custom command that I have created myself. Here are the same steps. We have the login, email, password, submit, and check the logged in, right? But what I'm doing it in here additionally is to add this CY session and naming that login. I know I have a lot of logins in here, which might be confusing, but this is a session. So what this will do for us is that whenever we are using this login command, Cypress is going to find this session command and is going to do one of 2 things. First time the test runs, it will run through those same steps. So no changes there. But the second time, it's going to take a look. Hey, so this is a session I have already been through. Should I repeat that? And the answer is no. Cypress is not going to repeat that, but instead it's going to take all the cookies and local storage and session storage and all the things that happen in browser in order for you to be logged in, caches them, and saves them so they can be used later. So when I'm running this command for the second time, I'm actually not going to go through these login steps, but I'm just taking the cache, apply that to the browser, and then open my browser as if I were logged in, because I am logged in. You can take it even one step further and combine these CY session with CY origin. With version, I don't remember if it was version 10 or version 11, Cypress has released a CY origin command, and it has paired it with the CY session. What that means is that when you have a third-party server which you are visiting for a login, you might get into a situation, if you're trying to log in before every test, you might get into a situation where you are going to be rate limited, because that third-party server is trying to prevent you from logging too fast or too often or too many times, right? What this CY session is going to do, that for all of your tests, and you can have hundreds of tests, you're just going to be logged in once, and then use that cached session to give it into any test you are using. And that way, you're not going to hit your identity provider repeatedly, lowering the risk of being rate limited, and end up having much cleaner code, because you're not going to be doing the same thing over and over again through UI. All right, so maybe to wrap it up in here, my advice for writing stable tests is the following. Of course, read the documentation. Cypress has done a stellar job with their documentation. Every command is full of examples, full of different parts. And I pointed out one thing today is the yielding part, right? What does this command actually return? What does it pass to another command? Make sure to look into that. Make your tests readable, not only for you, for your future selves, but also for your colleagues. You can use things like TypeScript and JSDoc to make your code self-documenting and readable for any new member. If you have to onboard your new member for 6 months, it's probably not the best thing. But if you make your test readable and descriptive, that's going to save you a lot of money and a lot of time. Examine your application DOM, your network calls, your cookies. As I mentioned in the beginning, I teach developers about web development and developers about testing and testers about web development. I think it's time for us testers to be more interested in what is actually happening in the applications that we test. Don't do black box testing. Try to create an application on your own. You will learn so much about that, and it's going to help you write more effective tests, and it's going to give you insight into how your application works. It's great. That would be my number one advice. If you're a tester, try to dipping your toes into the development world as well. Make use of retriability, which is one of the core concepts in Cypress. Every command can be retried. You can make that play against you, but you can make that play for you. So make sure you check it out. Make sure you understand it, and make use of it for your test. Also, chains and browser console, as I mentioned, have that thing open all the time. Think about arrange, act, and assert. If you haven't used this pattern, try to review your tests and try to see which part of your test is arranging, which one is asserting, which one is acting, and make sure that they align well and you're not going mindlessly all around and your tests actually have a direction. Join the community. You feel free to join my Discord, where we talk about Cypress, and but also not only Cypress. We talk about all kinds of stuff. Read the docs. I know I have this twice, but it's actually really important. Also, experiment and learn. And if you feel like that, you can visit my workshop. I will be announcing one soon, so you can sign up for a newsletter on my page, and I will definitely let you know. Also, connect with me on Twitter, on LinkedIn. I also have a YouTube channel, and just like a couple of minutes before this talk, I have announced that I will be doing a stream tomorrow, and I will be looking at different replay tools. So Playwright has a trace viewer. Cypress has announced a test replay feature for their cloud service. There's a solution from Currents. There's also Replay.io. I will be comparing these time traveling and debugging tools tomorrow live on my YouTube channel. So come and join. It's going to be fun. So thank you very much, and I will be looking forward to your questions.
Yes, thank you, Philip. I completely agree that reading the docs should be stated 2 times because it's very important. And Cypress documentation is really amazing, and your presentation is awesome.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Glad
you.
you enjoyed that.
By the way, I recall it myself typing like Jim Carrey on the first slide, then dealing with flaky tests. It's a nightmare for sure.
Yeah,
And
nobody likes to deal with that.
yeah. So I'm sure that your advices, if implemented by our participants in real life, will help them to avoid many difficult and complex situations. So
That would be great. If that's the goal we touched on today, that's awesome.
yeah, agree. And we have a couple of questions. Do you see them, or I can read them?
Yeah, I can see them, so I can maybe go one by one through them. So the first question is: I know that you don't like page object pattern approach. So what would you recommend to make test files clear and easy to read, even for non-technical person? But without BDD approach, BDD is evil. I agree with you on that one. I have just to be clear, I have written a how to set up Cypress with Cucumber, just so I can have a blog that I can send to the people that are asking about this. I haven't used this approach because I don't find it particularly effective. About the page object model or page object pattern, it is there has been a blog post early in the stages of Cypress. Don't use page objects, use app actions instead, which I think it sort of managed to confuse a lot of people because app actions are not really like one-to-one thing that you can sort of switch instead of using page object model. The beef I have with page object model is that there's actually quite a lot of boilerplate code that you need to set up in order to write your test. So it can depend on your situation. Sometimes the page object model can actually be good for you, especially if you're dealing with very, very complex situations, especially if you're not able to not use your UI for everything. If you basically have to do the login over and over again, if you don't have control over your data, if there's like a lot of uncertainty that you want to tackle with sort of like automation robot approach, then page object pattern can actually be beneficial. The more control you have over the code you are testing, the less there is a need for page object pattern. The thing with page objects is that they might be good for creating abstractions, but sometimes, as I see it applied, the abstraction goes too wild. You go through 7 files, and at the final file, you'll find a function that will just do get and a button. I don't think that's effective use of abstraction. I would advise to avoid abstracting everything and try to like not write a single line twice, because I don't feel like this is the effective way, especially if you're debugging. If your test fails and you need to go through 7 different files to find out why the test has failed, I think that's going to make your debugging process slower. And just yesterday, I asked on LinkedIn, how much time do you spend writing your test, whether the bigger portion of your test is writing your test or debugging the tests? Last time I looked, it was 60% people wrote that the bigger portion of their day is debugging tests. So this is something you need to take into account. If your tests are too abstract and not very descriptive, then that's going to slow you down, and that debugging is going to take a bigger portion of your day. If your tests are easy to read, so maybe you just use plain commands, right? You have the arrange part, you have the action part, you have the assert part. You see with the very concise Cypress syntax what you are getting, what you are clicking on. If you have a great selectors, then that's going to make your life very easy when you want to debug something. You know where your test failed, you know what's going on, you get the information from screenshots and videos, you're all good. You don't need page objects. as soon as you add abstraction, you're also adding complexity to your test. So I'm not saying I'm against page object model, but it's very easy to not use that pattern effectively. So just be cautious of that. And I mean, use your own judgment. I don't know your application, so you probably know what you're doing. If you decide page objects are good, then they're good because you know best. So hopefully that answers the first question. I should probably be more brief with that, right?
We have 9 minutes, so yes,
Yeah.
thanks,
All right.
Martin.
Let's then move on to the second one. Implicit weights for an element appear on the page, while explicit weights wait for specific conditions such as presence of an element or the element to be clickable. Is it vice versa in Cypress? No, I don't think it's vice versa. At least I don't. If I understand the question correctly, what timeout points to is the upper limit for which you want to test, which you want to wait for a certain element or certain action to be completed. So that's what the timeout is. It's not a timeout of the test. It's not a timeout like waiting timeout. It's just the upper limit. So I have a suspicion that there might be some similar terminology that points to a different principle in some other framework. But that's what Cypress. That's what timeout means in Cypress. All right, so let's move on to the next question. If we set E2E project to pipeline, where to install Cypress plugins? In dependencies or dev dependencies? It's going to depend on how your project works. So I've seen, especially in mono repos, that you should install things that are connected to the code, to the dev dependencies, and things that actually build the application to the dependencies. So in general, I would lean into dev dependencies here for both Cypress and the plugins as well. All right, another question. What approach do you prefer? One test with multiple assertions or multiple tests with a single assertion? For end-to-end test, I would lean for the first one. One test with multiple assertions. I know this might feel like it violates the principle that I laid forward, arrange, act, assert. With end-to-end tests, you can actually be more liberal with that. You can actually arrange and then act and assert multiple times. The point I was trying to make is that the arrange part is not part of the test, and maybe that should be not be a part of your UI interaction in the test. All right, yeah, sorry, I heard someone screaming. I was afraid that my kids might be.
Yeah, I also hear that.
Yeah, it's my baby.
Okay.
Well, we're good. No one's getting murdered. No worries.
Oh, hope.
All right, and one last question. Thanks for the great talk. Oh, thank you very much. I'm glad you enjoyed. Question regarding your thoughts on the future of Cypress and how it compares to Playwright and its potential. That's a great question. So you might have noticed that it has been sort of discussed in the past weeks. Someone said that Cypress is going down, it has no future, and you should migrate your test. Absolutely not true. So there was this Reddit post. It was really weird because it was sort of an opinion, but so many people took it seriously. It was opinion based on essentially lies, because it's also claimed that Cypress ambassadors are paid by Cypress. They're not. So that's one thing. And there were also some information which this person would not be able to get. So it was all a speculation. Unluckily, it was amplified by some people, which I don't think was the best thing to do. But I am not fearful for Cypress's future. I think the company is doing great. We had an internal ambassador meeting. I think it was I think it was 2 weeks ago actually, where they told us how they're doing. They have more than 3,500 clients all over the world. So the dashboard is doing good. They're doing this great update with test replays. Maybe you have heard about that. If not, tomorrow on my stream, I'm going to show you that. It's pretty cool. So they are updating, and while the open source runner has maybe just have been getting like smaller updates, they are actually doing a lot of work on the dashboard, which keeps the company alive. So the company is doing good. The open source tool is also doing good. So I think betting on Cypress is not going to come and bite you in a couple of years. Of course, we're talking about software, so I don't think anything is given. But yeah, so far how the things are looking, I think Cypress is doing good. The comparison to Playwright, which is backed by Microsoft, I heard someone claim that being backed by Microsoft is some sort of guarantee that the tool is going to be there. I don't think that's guarantee. We have seen Microsoft and other big companies slash projects left and right when it got to budget cutting. So I don't think like that's they could close down the project as easily as any other project. I don't think that will happen as well, but that's I don't think like being backed by Microsoft is a guarantee of future existence, as we've seen multiple times in the past. I think the comparison, Playwright is definitely interesting. It's still growing. It has a fraction of the users that Cypress has. It is a interesting project. I personally am working with that currently. I don't find it particularly enjoyable. I enjoy Cypress a lot more, but that's a personal preference. Some people have the personal preference for going for Playwright. I think they're making a good choice. I think in today's era, it makes much more sense to write your tests in JavaScript or TypeScript than going with Java and try to automate your web React application or Angular application with framework like Selenium. I'm not a huge fan, but that's a personal preference. So I'm not trying to bash anyone who's working on Selenium, whether the tool or they use it for work. Just to put it out there, I think it's going to be interesting in the next couple of years how Cypress will grow and how Playwright will grow. I don't think they are yet a huge competition, but it might get to that in a couple of years. So far, Cypress has quite a head start. So I'm hoping it will stay that way. We'll see.
Okay, yes, last question was quite tricky because everybody is aware of this challenge. But if we continue this question, if you are asked to join Playwright as an ambassador, will you go there or not?
If I were asked,
Yep.
I don't think I would have a problem with that. I mean, we are living in the golden era of testing solutions. I think what we have both in Playwright and Cypress is really, really cool. Like Playwright is super fast. It's super easy to test different browsers. It has a very nice VS Code integration. It doesn't have a so nice as the syntax is not as nice as in Cypress. What I would like to see happen is that these two tools would sort of merge together. And we actually saw some of that in the past when Cypress finally implemented WebKit for testing. They have used the Playwright solution, like the Playwright browser that the Playwright team has built on top of WebKit, and connected that to Cypress, which I thought was really interesting. Some people were like, haha, they cannot even make their own solution. I was like, no, this is a great thing actually. This is the power of open source and the power of getting together and providing the best solutions we can. So I would honestly like to see more of that. If that were to fruition, that would be awesome. So I have no problem with Playwright. I'm still learning that tool. Maybe that's the part which I'm not enjoying yet. It's a little bit of struggle, but I will get there. And joining ambassadors program. Actually, I was just thinking about it a couple of days ago. So we'll see. We'll see.
Okay, okay. And yes, I like this plugin for WebKit, which has mark experimental plugin.
Yeah, it's still experimental because Cypress is being cautious with releasing their features, because they have quite a lot of like enterprise clients, and obviously the stakes are high with these types of clients, so they mark it as experimental, so so they don't have like this. The companies are like not too harsh for on them for like fixing a bug or whatever, because they need to balance their priorities for the whole world, not only a single company. So I think it's going to stay experimental for some time, but as we will see rise of Cypress and growth of users, I think that's going to come out of the experimental feature as quite soon. We'll see.
Yep, completely agree. By the way, we have one more question from Juan Torres, and do you see it?
Oh, how do you become an ambassador? You can actually go to Cypress.io, and at the very bottom, I think there is a part on ambassadors. Let me see. And if you go to the ambassadors page, there's a link on how to become ambassador. Yeah, there's just at the top, apply to become ambassador. So you click that link, it will take you to a form. You will get an interview, and hopefully you'll get in.
As simple as as that.
As simple as that. Yeah, I had it a little bit more simple because I joined very, very, very early when not many people knew about Cypress. So I became ambassador instantly, but now it's an interview process. So.
Okay. In any case, I hope we will try someday.
Yep.
So thank you, Philip. Thank you, participants. We are slowly running out of time. Yep. If there are no more questions, I see no more questions.
Yeah, it doesn't seem that way. If you have any questions, feel free again to reach out to me either on Twitter or on LinkedIn. I'd be happy to answer. I'm sometimes slow for answering, but I will eventually get to you. So please be patient.
Yep. So you can also post questions in our QA community. We will be glad to answer or redirect it to Philip directly. And follow Symphony Solutions for more events and check out our page with vacancies on our website. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Bye, everyone. Thanks for joining.
Thanks. Bye-bye.